We're going to move to DeKalb County now, where there has been a major shift. The DeKalb County School District had put out this plan to close more than 20 schools. Consolidation really changed the way their schools were structured. But now we are seeing a huge change. Leaders are hitting pause on that controversial plan that could have closed up to 20 schools. Grace King has been following the latest developments. And Grace, this is a big shock for parents, students, and from the district. Talk about what happened.
Well, Caitlin, we heard a lot of pushback to the round one scenarios, talking about which schools could and couldn't close. We heard a lot of pushback on round two that said, here are the list of schools that we're looking at to close. And this says, okay, we're going to take a pause on that. We know that there are certain schools that are set to open, either brand new ones or renovated ones, expanded ones. We know those have to open. Let's focus on the over-enrolled schools first. Let's spread some of the kids out there. And then we will kind of take another look and start looking at those under-enrolled schools. So this is just really shifting the timeline a lot back, kind of going back to the drawing board. And instead of the district saying, hey, here's what we think, they're going to say, okay, what do you think? And then kind of make up the plans. The interim superintendent, he was saying, we realized this was too, the district decides and presents to families instead of the families gives feedback and they make it based on that.
Yeah, I know that you had a chance to hear what the superintendent said. What was his message there to parents?
Really that he wants to put the families first in these conversations. They even said this summer they're going to start looking at the feedback they got for round one and round two. Again, those scenarios are now gone, but they're going to look at the feedback and say, okay, we did hear from families of these schools, but maybe we didn't hear from families of these schools. How can we find those families? How can we make sure they're part of that conversation? And he released a video this morning really just explaining a lot about where the district is and where the district is going. On Tuesday, Interim Superintendent Dr. Norman Sauce acknowledged the student assignment project's shortcomings.
We learned that the process felt too top-down. We learned that the student experience was not enough of the forefront of the conversation.
He promised to slow down the process and put DeKalb County school families first.
We heard you, and the process is evolving because of it.
The district will first address overcrowded schools by opening a renovated Idlewood Elementary, a new Dresden Elementary, a renovated and expanded Cross Keys High School, a new Sequoia Middle School, and then a new Sequoia High School.
And these have been in the works for a number of years, long predating the student assignment project work. This new cluster will impact every cluster in that region in some way.
They'll figure out what those impacts look like after extensive conversations with families this fall, ahead of any potential board votes in December.
That new cluster, along with these new and expanded schools, mean attendance boundaries will have to be reviewed and addressed.
The district will then shift its focus to the under-enrolled schools next spring to look at things like student experience, facilities, and more.
Between now and the start of the school year, our student assignment team will continue reviewing feedback, analyzing data, and preparing a detailed engagement plan so that when we come together this fall, those conversations are ready, meaningful, and productive.
And those conversations, again, will start this fall with families at the center of them. He hopes they can then kind of come up with some more community-based solutions to this over-enrollment problem.
And I know so many parents felt really strongly about this. I would drive through DeKalb County and see parents and students protesting on the side of the street. So what were you hearing from families about this?
I spoke with one mom today, and she said the smaller elementary schools for her children made a world of difference. They had a STEM program there that her kids really thrived in, and she worries that, when you talk about shifting one to another, it just, it messes with their friends, it messes with their cohorts, it messes with some of those programs they have. And, the district's saying, well, not all schools have those programs that you might rely on, so we're trying to make it more equitable across the district. But a lot of the families are just really attached to their schools. A lot of people have bought houses in areas that they can't just up and move to go to their different school or rezone. They're saying, I went to this elementary school. We have generations of families that went to this elementary school, and they just feel really strongly about their schools and just having that in their neighborhood. So they're hoping DeKalb will involve them a lot more in the process. They said they're cautiously optimistic. They weren't thrilled with the round one and round two scenarios, but hearing that they're not trying to have that vote by December anymore, they're just going to take a pause on consolidation altogether and then reevaluate next spring. They were really excited about that.
Yeah, because it gives them a little bit more time. I know that a lot of the DeKalb County elementary schools are actually in neighborhoods. So it makes sense that you heard that feedback from families this is quite literally walking distance from my house. It's my neighborhood school. When do they anticipate a timeline for when we're going to hear more about what their plan looks like?
So starting in August, they're going to start hosting feedback sessions, and that will be specifically on the schools that are affected by the new schools opening. So they're going to have a new Sequoia High School cluster that'll have some trickle-down effect. Some other areas, maybe like Tucker or Dunwoody, those schools, some of the boundaries might have to shift a little, so you might be redistrict slightly there. They're not saying they're closing schools, but to balance it out, they might have to move some students, some families from one school to another. And then in spring 2027, so next spring, they're going to start looking at those consolidation and those under-enrolled schools. But timeline way shifted. Before we were talking about a December vote for possibly starting as soon as next fall.
Wow.
Obviously, if the conversations start next spring, the timeline for that is just going to take a lot longer.
Yeah, I know this is a confusing issue with a lot of different perspectives on both sides. We really appreciate you following this for us. Thanks, Grace.
Absolutely.